If you've got an AGM battery in your car and it died and it's in a deep depletion mode right now, and you don't have a battery tender that could recover it out of deep depletion, but you do have a benchtop power supply with constant current mode and constant voltage modes, you can recover the battery gently the way that I did it. So what I've got going on is I have a 5-year-old AGM battery. It's 80 amp hours. It's original to the car, probably 40,000 miles. I didn't drive my car for 3 months. It was sitting and the electronics drained it down such that nothing can start. The car doesn't turn on. The computers don't turn on. I measured the battery voltage that it was putting out, and across the jump start terminals is the same as the battery in the car. It was putting out about 3.1 volts, which is not as bad as they can be drained to. I think the very serious low level is around 2.5 volts. But regardless, when an AGM battery is drained that far, it needs to be gently recovered for it to work again. So I don't have a battery tender. That's how I'm in this situation in the first place. I don't have a jump start cable set or a battery, but I do have access to a benchtop power supply. This is a pretty impressive one. It's a Keithley 2260 kind of professional engineering benchtop supply. It could do, I believe, up to 30 volts, 36 amps. So it's quite a beefy supply. And the way that I brought it back to life is, first, I'll show you, I set this, right now it's running in constant voltage mode, but initially I set it to constant current mode. And the parameters I chose was it's an 80 amp hour battery. The recommendation is to bring it out at about 10% of its amp hour capacity as the maximum current. So 10% of an 80 amp hour battery would be 8 amps. But just to bring it out of that deep discharge, I went to 5%. I limited the power supply to be running at a 4 amp constant current. I enabled the over voltage and over current protections. So 14.8 volts is the recommended maximum voltage that you should ever expose an AGM battery for. That's recommended in your manufacturer manual, but the same for all the manufacturers of the batteries. That's just based on the battery chemistry. So initially, set your power supply to run in constant current mode. Put it to something like 5 or 10% of the amp hour capacity of your battery. And when you first turn it on, it's not going to be charging at 14 volts. Mine was charging at about 5 or 6 volts when I first turned it on last night, but it was pulling that constant 4 amps. Then as the battery filled up, I could see the voltage creep up. When I came to it this morning, it was charging at about a little bit over 12 volts to reach that 4 amp constant current. Now, once you get to that point, I was actually able to start the car. It was running fine, but to actually fill up the battery, I needed to switch over to a constant voltage mode. So what I did here is I set the constant voltage to charge at 14.4 volts, and I raised the current limit to 8 amps or 10% of my amp hour capacity on the battery. This has been running for a couple hours. When I first set it up, it couldn't maintain a constant voltage of 14.4 volts at 8 amps. So it was closer to 13.6 volts, and it was taking the full 8 amp capacity. Now that it was allowed to charge up at 8 amps for a little bit, now it actually can sit at the set point of 14.4 volts. You can see that's my set point, and the current limit was 8 amps. So something you'll notice, especially when you're bringing out the battery out of deep depletion, I got a relay near the ECU that was clicking when I first was charging up the battery. That's because as soon as you give it a little bit of power, the computers will try to come on, but there's not enough current that's being supplied by the limited power supply and the battery can supplement that current, so the relays were flipping on, but not enough power to actually boot. The other thing, once I started into constant voltage mode, I could hear this car has a secondary supplemental 12 volt lithium battery inside. That one has internal protections, and that one was knocking out as the car was being charged up. But this is pretty much how I brought it, recovered it from deep depletion. It's a pretty funny situation that you got to find yourself in, where you don't have a jump start kit, you don't have a battery tender, but you do happen to have a pretty nice benchtop power supply. As long as you got a constant current, constant voltage modes on them, and this is a 360 watt model, you should be able to bring back your AGM battery out of deep depletion. And just like one last tip, even funnier situation, I didn't even have anything to clamp the terminals from the power supply down to the jump start terminals on my car. And the way that I ended up doing that is I was using these Romix clamps for knockout boxes, like for example an electrical box, and they worked out perfectly because I was able to put the eyelet of the power connector through this clamp, and then the clamp actually grips on really nicely onto the battery terminals. So that's one last tip for the one other person that may find him or herself in this situation with a deep depletion AGM battery and a pretty fancy power supply.